The sun was beginning to set in Accra, casting a golden hue on the busy streets. At Grace Preparatory Academy, the lively schoolyard was now empty, save for a little girl sitting on the cold stone steps by the gate. The little girl named Zara swung her tiny legs back and forth, humming to herself. She wasn't scared. Not yet. The teachers had all left. The security man, Uncle Ben, sat in his chair, snoring lightly. The school driver had driven off with the last batch of children. Zara's pink backpack, decorated with princesses, lay beside her. Her mother always picked her up at 4 o'clock, but today, the clock had struck 6, and still, no one came. Her tiny hands clenched the straps of her bag. "Where is Mommy?" Zara asked, fear beginning to grip her as she anticipated her mother's arrival. Back at home, Linda and George were arguing, loudly, each blaming each other for not picking Zara. "I told you to pick her up, George," Linda snapped, grabbing her car keys from the table. "Me? You said you would." George's face twisted in confusion. "What have you been doing that you forgot to pick her up?" He had just returned from a stressful meeting at work, hoping to enjoy his evening in peace. Linda froze, realization washing over her like a cold wave. "Zara." Her voice was barely a whisper. They had left their daughter at school. Without another word, Linda dashed out, her heart hammering as she sped toward the school. George followed closely in his own car, his hands trembling against the wheel. What kind of parents forget their child? At the school gate, Zara was beginning to feel uneasy. The streetlights flickered, and Uncle Ben had stopped snoring. He was awake now, watching her with concern. "Zara, my dear, are you sure no one is coming for you?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "Mommy is coming," she whispered, more to convince herself than him. Just then, a car pulled up. But it wasn't her mother's. A sleek, black SUV rolled to a stop. The windows slid down, revealing a woman with red lips and large sunglasses. She smiled. "Zara." Zara hesitated. "Yes. I'm a friend of your mommy's. She sent me to pick you up." Zara bit her lip. Mommy had never sent anyone before. The woman's smile widened. "Don't be scared. Come on, let's go." Zara looked at Uncle Ben. He was watching the car closely, his eyes narrowed. Before she could respond, he stepped forward. "Madam, who are you?" The woman's smile faltered. "I just told you. I'm a family friend." Uncle Ben shook his head, taking Zara's hand. "Her parents didn't mention anything about you." The woman sighed, then without warning, sped off into the night. Zara clutched Uncle Ben's arm, her heart racing. Something about that woman had felt wrong. Minutes later, Linda's car skidded to a halt in front of the school. She jumped out before the engine had even stopped running. "Zara!" Zara turned, and at the sight of her mother's tear-streaked face, her own eyes welled up. Linda rushed to her, scooping her up in her arms. George arrived right behind her, panting, his face pale with guilt. "Oh my baby, I'm so sorry," Linda sobbed, holding Zara tight. George placed a shaky hand on Zara's back, his heart heavy with regret. Uncle Ben cleared his throat. "Madam, you were lucky today." Linda looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "There was a woman here," he said grimly. "She tried to take Zara." The world seemed to tilt. Linda's grip on her daughter tightened as terror clawed at her throat. "Who is she?" she asked. After few seconds, George's stomach twisted. "What woman?" he also asked, with a trembling voice. Uncle Ben described the SUV, the red lips, the sunglasses. But it meant nothing to them. They had no idea who she was. Zara shuddered. She said you sent her, Mommy. Linda's blood ran cold. I sent her? No, I didn't. Who could she be? Why does she want my baby? George turned to his wife, his face set in stone. We are never forgetting her again, he said. Linda nodded, clutching Zara as if she would never let go. Later that night, after Zara had fallen asleep between them, Linda and George sat up in bed, silent. The weight of their negligence pressed on them. What if Uncle Ben hadn't been there? What if that woman had taken Zara? We have to find out who she was, George muttered. Linda approved without hesitation. Linda nodded. Tomorrow, I'll ask around. Maybe the school has cameras. Neither of them slept well that night. In the darkness, every sound felt suspicious, same as every shadow they see. And back at the school, from the darkness beyond the school fence, a pair of eyes had watched them, before disappearing into the night. The danger wasn't over yet. The next morning, Linda woke up early to prepare Zara for school, while George dressed for work. When she was done, she drove to the school. The headmistress, Mrs. Owusu, was already in her office, sipping tea. Good morning, madam, Linda greeted. Good morning, Mrs. Owusu responded warmly. She was surprised to see Linda in her office that early. Linda explained what had happened the previous night, and immediately Mrs. Owusu's face turned pale. That's troubling, she said, opening a drawer and pulling out a file. There have been reports of a woman matching that description wandering around the school this past week. Linda's breath hitched. Why didn't anyone tell the parents? Mrs. Owusu sighed. We didn't have proof, and it also didn't occur to us that she was dangerous. Linda requested to watch the CCTV footage for the previous day, and they rushed to check it. They watched but didn't see anything. Just when they were about to stop watching, the grainy video showed the black SUV idling outside the gate for several minutes before the woman got out. She looked around cautiously before approaching Zara. She was waiting for the perfect moment. Linda whispered, feeling sick. Do you recognize her? Mrs. Owusu asked. Linda shook her head, but something about the woman's posture felt oddly familiar. Then it hit her. That stance. That presence. The way she moved with confidence. Linda gasped. It can't be. Mrs. Owusu looked at her, puzzled. Who is she? Linda's hands trembled as she covered her mouth. My ex-husband's sister. She always wanted Zara. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't a random kidnapping attempt. It was personal. Linda's mind raced. Why now? Why would Nana come for Zara after all this time? We need to call the police, Mrs. Owusu suggested. Linda nodded, but deep down, she knew this wasn't just about Zara. This was a warning. Nana was making her presence known, and that meant she wasn't done yet. Linda's mind reeled as memories of her past resurfaced. David, her ex-husband, had been a cruel man, his charm dissolving into violent outbursts behind closed doors. For years, she endured his abuse, hoping he would change. But one day when he raised a hand against her while she was pregnant, she knew she had to leave. That day Linda lost her pregnancy, and she knew she might lose her life too if she does leave. Escaping him had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, and despite the threats, she rebuilt her life from scratch. David never recovered from her departure. His ego had been bruised beyond repair, and the man who once took pride in controlling her spiraled into depression. Linda had heard from mutual friends that he became a shadow of himself, drowning in self-pity and regret. His sister, Nana, had always worshipped him, unable to accept his downfall. She blamed Linda for his misery, convinced that her leaving had broken him. To Nana, Linda hadn't just walked away, she had destroyed her brother. Now, Nana wanted revenge. If her brother had suffered, then Linda would suffer too. And what better way to break a mother than to take away the one thing she loved most? Stealing Zara in order to force Linda into the same darkness that had consumed David. Linda's hands clenched into fists. She would not let history repeat itself. Nana had underestimated her. She had fought to escape David's grasp, and now, she would fight even harder to protect her daughter. This time, she would not run. This time, she would stand her ground. Linda wasted no time. She called George, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "It's Nana," she said. She tried to take Zara. George was silent for a moment, then exhaled sharply. "Are you sure? I know how she moves, how she carries herself. It was her, George. She blames me for what happened to David. And now, she's after our daughter." George muttered a curse. "I'm coming to the school now. We need to involve the police." By the time he arrived, Linda had already spoken to the authorities. A patrol car was stationed outside the school, and the headmistress had called an emergency staff meeting to heighten security awareness. Uncle Ben, now fully alert and shaken by the previous night's events, promised to keep a close watch on Zara. At home, Linda and George sat Zara down. "Baby, do you remember what we told you about strangers?" Linda asked gently. Zara nodded, her little brows furrowing. "Yes, Mommy. I shouldn't go with anyone unless you say so." Linda hugged her tightly. "That's right, sweetheart. If anyone ever tells you we sent them, don't believe them unless we tell you ourselves first. Okay?" Zara nodded again, her face serious. "I was scared, Mommy." The lady smiled, but her eyes didn't. Linda's stomach twisted. "You're a smart girl, my love. I'm so proud of you." That night, they reinforced all the locks, installed a security system, and made sure Zara slept between them. Every sound in the house made Linda's heart race, but she willed herself to stay calm. The following morning, a detective named Inspector Teta visited their home. He had reviewed the CCTV footage and confirmed their fears. Nana was indeed the woman in the SUV. "We've put out a watch alert for her," he assured them. "If she's in Accra, we'll find her." Days passed, then weeks, and there was no sign of Nana. But Linda refused to let her guard down. She altered her daily routines, making sure never to take the same routes. She arranged for Zara to be picked up and dropped off by a trusted driver, and Uncle Ben was always present at the gate when she arrived. Then one evening, Linda received a call from an unknown number. "Hello, Linda." Her breath caught. She knew that voice. Nana. Her name felt like poison on Linda's tongue. A cold chuckle. "You think you've won? You think hiding behind your husband and the police will keep Zara safe?" Linda gripped the phone tighter. "You'll never get near my daughter again." "Are you sure about that?" Nana's voice dripped with malice. "You took everything from my brother. I only want to balance the scales." Linda's hands shook, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "David lost himself. I didn't destroy him, his own actions did. And you know it." Silence stretched between them. Then Nana's voice dropped to a whisper. "You will never know peace." The line went dead. Linda stared at the phone, anger and fear battling inside her. She turned to George, who had been listening from the doorway. "She's not going to stop." George wrapped his arms around her. "Then we'll be ready. We won't let her win." The police intensified their search, and with pressure mounting, Nana was finally found hiding in a small guest house outside Accra. When she was arrested, she showed no remorse, only a chilling smile. "You think this is over?" she sneered at Linda when they met at the station. "You may have won today, but I'll never forget what you did." Linda met her gaze without fear. "And I'll never forget that I will always protect my daughter." Nana was charged with attempted child abduction and other offenses. As she was led away, Linda felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't just about Nana, it was about breaking free from the ghosts of her past. That night, as she tucked Zara into bed, Linda kissed her forehead and whispered, "You are safe, my love. And you always will be." For the first time in weeks, she slept soundly, knowing that the nightmare was finally over.